I would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors. So today's shir on Parashat Vayera is sponsored by Sandy and Nachum Wolf, also by Aviva and Leon Waznika. It is sponsored to commemorate the yahrzeit of Sandy and Aviva's father, Pesach ben Avram Abba, Mr. Hoffman, Zichrono Livracha. So thank you for the sponsorship, the Neshama Sharav and Aliyah from our words of Torah that we study here today. Hope everybody's doing okay. I think there would be a benefit of having a Chumash handy. Otherwise, we'll do our part in trying to present the information even without a text. You know, there's a rule that our tradition teaches, which is harbe shluchim lamakom. There are many ways that God Almighty could give us what we need. And it's a concept that has significance when it comes to our survival and livelihood. In other words, we are believers that God has a desire to give, and there are times that he gives us through messengers. The messenger itself, right, or himself, should ideally recognize that what they are giving a specific individual, it is due to the will of God. But even when the messenger does not recognize that what they are giving is from a higher source, nevertheless, clearly it is a gift from God. Now, what am I trying to get to with these words? Avraham Avinu was promised, as he made his way to the land of Israel, a whole series of blessings. Among them was actually wealth. Now, earlier on in last week's parasha, we read that he received gifts from Pharaoh. Abraham had no issue taking the gifts, no issue at all. Even though the circumstances were problematic, he took his wife, but he understood that the gifts really are from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No problem at all. And if you would ask Avraham Avinu, why did you take these gifts? And he would say, listen, God Almighty promised, it's being handed over to me. I see it as the hands of God. No problem there. However, in last week's parasha, we read about Avraham Avinu going to battle, and he had his own army. And in that battle, he is able basically to save several cities or several small kingdoms, one of them being Sodom. Now, due to the fact that without him, those communities would be devastated, anything that he was able to save, right, from the attackers technically belonged to Avraham Avinu. And there would be nothing ethically, clearly not halachically problematic if Avraham Avinu walks away with some wealth from the loot of the battlefield. Nevertheless, we find that after the battle, when the king of Sodom turns to Avraham Avinu and he says to him, you have the right to take their rechush. So this is occurring in last week's parasha in the 14th chapter, verse 21. And the king of Sodom said to Avraham, give me the people and take the possessions for yourself. You have every right to take the possessions. That is what the king of Sodom says to Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu responds that I lift up my hands to Hashem, God, maker of heavens and earth, that I will not take from a thread to a shoe strap. I'm taking absolutely nothing from you. This is what Abraham says to the king of stone. And he presents a little bit of an explanation that he does not want the king of Sodom to tell people, to believe that he is the one that made Abraham rich. Velo tomar, Abraham says to the king of Sodom, I don't want you saying, Ani he'esharti et Abraham. I am the one who made Abraham Avinu rich. And commentators struggle with this because we do find Abraham taking gifts from others. What was his issue with Sodom? What was the problem? So, in Jewish law, there's great value in people that give gifts to a synagogue. And you read throughout history, it was understood to be a merit that if the synagogue has no candles and you are the one that provides those candles for the synagogue, it's a zchut, a significant merit. Today it would probably apply to the electric bill, right? You are the one that, due to your generosity, you go ahead and are sure that the synagogue has enough light for people to be able to read from their Siddur, a tremendous merit. That's what our tradition teaches. Now, we are also told that when a person makes a donation, they have the right, to display their name, that people should know. At times, it even encourages others to make such donations. That is all within tradition. However, we are told that when a gift is received to a synagogue or once upon a time to the temple, you have to be sure that the individual, in the words of the Talmud, yimserem latzibur yafeh yafeh, he should hand it over to the congregation, he should hand it over to the temple and not retain control. Imagine a person donates a Sefer Torah to a synagogue. Beautiful. We read the words of Torah in the merit of that person. Now imagine if this person unfortunately believes that he is still in control of that Sefer Torah. So one day a person is called up to the Torah and the person who donated the Sefer Torah doesn't like the person being called up. So he turns to the gabbai and the rabbi and he says, listen, I donated that Sefer Torah. You never ever call up Feivel again. Now we have a problem here because yes, it's nice to make a donation, but you have to realize that if you are giving it to the congregation, to the tzibur, it's no longer yours. You should be moser, yafeh, in a nice way. Don't believe that you are controlling that which is taking place in a congregation by making that donation. This is what we are taught in our tradition. There are people that unfortunately believe that what they have, it is only due to their tremendous wisdom, abilities, knowledge, success. And as a result, they start viewing the world in a way that the world is basically a world of successful people and a world of people who are not successful, and let the successful enjoy what they have. And don't go ahead and concern yourself for the ones who are in need. They're failures. If they are failures, they don't deserve anything. And this philosophy, in the words of the rabbis, was the philosophy of Zdom. Shali, shali, shalach, shalach. God, or there is no God. What I have, it's my money. And if it's my money, I have no interest in taking care of the needs of others. I remember in the election in the United States of 1996. So in the White House, there was a charismatic Democratic president by the name of Bill Clinton. And running against him was a fellow who probably had zero chances, a fellow by the name of Bob Dole. And as Bob Dole realized that he is declining in the polls, so he made an attempt to try to appear a little bit more conservative. So among the things he did was, for example, he got as a running mate, he got Jack Kemp, who was a big conservative, actually from Western New York. But one of the themes he was saying over and over again, trying to fight the liberal or Democratic Party big tax policy, he was saying over and over again, it's your money, right? Conservative approach, limit taxes. Well, perhaps it's true that when government does not take too much, it's good for the economy. And perhaps it's true that it is your money, but you know what Judaism teaches? Yeah, it's yours, but it was given to you by our higher authority to do good with it. We live in this world, right? For X amount of years, we're all given these tools to do good things. For some of us, it's the ability to do acts of kindness, right? There are people that are born with the ability to identify the struggles of others, and they are given the gift of words that give encouragement and strength to those others when they are suffering. That's a tool. It's in your toolbox. That toolbox was given to you to alleviate the pain and suffering that exists in this world. There are those that were given the tools and the ability to teach some Torah. And throughout the Jewish world, they're doing an incredible job. A gift was given to them. They're utilizing their gift. And to some, it's financial. That you live in this world and you have the ability to give to those who are in need, that others shouldn't be stressed in times of challenge. You know that in Toronto itself, right, when this pandemic broke out in March last year, so I was told by a rabbi down south that there were wealthy individuals that turned to him and said, Rabbi, I know that there are people that are going to be going through difficulty now, right? Whatever is needed, we're going to cover. This is a group of people down south here in Toronto. These are people that understand that if the financial gifts were given to them, it's a tool. That's the philosophy of Avraham. Avraham understands that what you have is here for a reason. Do good with it. This Sdom philosophy is, sheli, if it's mine, I'm going to buy another yacht, right? I'm going to buy another luxury house in Monaco if I have the ability to do so. Forget about others. When you are dealing with such a personality or such an attitude or such a philosophy, the philosophy of Sdom, you have to be careful that you don't strengthen it, that you do not provide fuel to such a corrupt philosophy. And that was the concern of Avraham Avinu. If I take a gift, and Avraham is a recognized personality, well respected throughout the region. If the king of Sdom could walk around and say, well, Avraham has success, well, that's because I gave him. In other words, it's not the higher being. I don't believe in that concept. If people have, it is due to their great abilities. And if Avraham has, don't give credit to his philosophy. Don't give credit to his message of doing for others, of chesed. Forget about it. I gave him. Meaning, just as you have people, right? Or at least in theory, just as the concept of giving to a synagogue and believing that you are in control and you could decide who is called up to the Torah and not is destructive, so too giving to Avraham and believing that you have, in essence, control, you are in control of him, that is what Avraham wants to fight, right? You can't make your enemies, ideological enemies, great. It's interesting. We were traveling a few days ago in northern Pennsylvania. Northern Pennsylvania appears to be a very conservative, and I mean a lot of big signs supporting Trump. Even though it's not an election year, it appears that there are still big signs there supporting Trump in northern Pennsylvania, near Williamsport. So we noticed a big billboard there that had on its side, a gigantic billboard, an image of a Taliban fighter. It looked like a Taliban fighter wearing whatever diaper they were on their head. And the face was of Joe Biden. And the words, big, large words, were making the Taliban great again. Those were the words on this gigantic board. So obviously it fit into the mindset of northern Pennsylvania, but what relates to us is Abraham has a concern with this philosophy of Sdom. It's a destructive philosophy. In no way can we ever have, in no way, thinks Abraham, can I have the king of that way of thinking taking credit for my success. Now, this is all an introduction to what's happening in Sdom in this week's Parsha. And now we're ready for it. If you have a Chumash, it's in chapter 19. And what's happening is that we already know Sdom is going to be destroyed. And the way it takes place is through these malachim, two angels, that they come to Sdom. And the Torah tells us, and these are important words, Velot, remember Lot, Abraham's nephew, he learned a lot from his uncle. He deserves some credit, but unfortunately he's attracted to the Sdom philosophy. So he's in Sdom, he's obviously much better than everyone else there. He's not a corrupt individual like the Stomites. And Lot is identified here as being in Sdom, and he is Yoshev B'Sha'ar Sdom. He's sitting at the gate of the city of Sdom. Now, it's interesting that we find him there, and the oral tradition provides for us some fascinating information about these three words, Yoshev B'Sha'ar Sdom. Piece of information number one. We find throughout Tanakh that the gates of the city is the location of where you will find judges. And therefore, if there's a dispute between two parties, where do you turn to? To the sha'ar, to the gate. Those sitting at the gate of the city would address at times religious issues, at times monetary issues. So, for example, if you want to determine the fair price of a specific commodity, you would go to the sha'ar, to the gate, and this judge will decide the price. And therefore, in Hebrew, when you talk about the price, for example, of foreign currency, it's called a sha'ar with an ayin. Okay, so now you know the relationship between a gate and a price. Now, so Lot was Yoshev B'Sha'ar Sdom. So the rabbis tell us, do you want to know what Lot was doing there? Number one, he was a judge. They made him a judge in Sdom. It's interesting. He's an outsider. He doesn't exactly fit into the mindset and to the philosophy of Sdom. Nevertheless, Lot becomes a judge. So that's one insight the rabbis give. Insight number two is they look at the word Yoshev, and they share with us that they have a tradition that actually it's not just a person who is sitting as a judge, but rather Yashav, on that day itself. On that day, he was nominated, or he was perhaps chosen to be the judge in Sdom on that day. So listen to this. We know, right? We know the end of the story. The city is destroyed. It's so corrupt. The day before it is destroyed, or perhaps even, right, several hours before it's destroyed early in the morning. So the evening before, Lot becomes the judge. And there's something fascinating, and this is a question that I wonder. By choosing a righteous judge, and yes, Lot was righteous if you compare him to the others in town. By choosing a righteous judge, that seems on the surface to indicate that this is a city that's turning around. They choose someone to guide them that's a relative of Abraham, a person that does have values to some extent. So my question is, why does God Almighty choose to destroy this city the morning after they actually are starting to change their direction? It does appear, if Lot indeed, as the rabbis are telling us, is now the judge, and obviously he should be guiding them in a better direction. So the question is, why is the city destroyed now? Was it not a good thing to choose Lot? That's the question I have. Was it not a good thing? So the truth is, sometimes you could have an individual that does something good, but that good thing is the cause to continue being destructive. And what do I mean by that? We've talked often during the high holiday season how the great Musar teachers were extremely concerned that during a season that we're supposed to improve, be forgiving to others, ask forgiveness from others, focus on real growth. The great Musar teachers are concerned that a person should not take something external, do something external, like throw a few breadcrumbs into a river, say a few statements by a river, and believe mission accomplished, I'm a better Jew. And at times, they note, by focusing on something external, you don't focus and you don't put an effort into areas that really need improvement. So sometimes the little bit of a good thing could be used as a justification to silence a guilty conscience, right? Imagine you have an organization, right? You have an organization. And this is an organization that's polluting rivers, causing illness to people because they need to make a lot of money from their facility, from whatever they're processing. They simply are not concerned about the environment and the impact on people, not at all. And then they decide, you know what, we need to work on our image, right? And we feel a little bit bad about what's taking place. So we're going to go ahead and create a foundation, a global foundation for philanthropy that will carry the name of our organization. A lot of times these big gas companies, oil companies, again, not that I believe that they are evil, but there are times perhaps that they are lacking a sensitivity to the environment, perhaps. So sometimes they're going to go ahead and create this initiative of a charity, a global foundation. And sometimes that little bit of good is used to silence a guilty conscience. And the result could be that the little bit of good becomes, in essence, a vehicle to continue doing bad. It's a problem with an individual. It could be a problem with an organization. And that was the problem taking place in Sodom. Their choice of Lot to become, quote unquote, a judge. Do you want to know why it was problematic? It was giving them the ability to justify their lifestyle. And by the way, Lot had no control over anything. Zero. He was given no ability at all to address the real problems of the city. And how do I know it? Because when these angels who appeared as people come to the gates and Lot wants to welcome them into his house, he makes it very clear to them, you could come to my house, but do me a favor. He says to them, Suru, turn in, don't get to my house following a direct line from the gate where we are located now to my house, because if people notice that I have a conversation with you, and the next thing they know, they see you guys walking directly into my house, they're going to find out that I have violated one of the worst sins in the city, to welcome outsiders. So do me a favor, come, but make an indirect route. So this is a person that's placed on what appears to be a position of leadership and power, but he's not. He's a puppet. And that's why it appears this is a city that needs to be destroyed when there is such corruption. And even perhaps that little bit of guilty conscience that existed there was silenced by putting there this puppet leader. That's when the Almighty feels that we have a major problem here. This is a city that cannot survive. So it's a little bit of what Sdom is about. It was a world that introduces Avraham and a world that introduces Sdom at the same time. But what I want to focus on a little bit is a little bit on Yishmael. So if you turn to chapter 21, you know the story that when Yitzchak is born, Sarah realizes that this Ishmael is having a negative influence on Yitzchak. Sarah turns to Avraham and says, listen, you have to send away Ishmael with his mother, because reality is there's no future if Yitzchak is corrupted by the mindset, by the way of thinking of Ishmael. There's no future here. So the Torah tells us that Avraham Avinu gives some bread, fills a skin with water, he gives it to Hagar. The child is taken as well, and she's sent out. And in the words of the Torah, we're going to focus on it. Vatelech. This is at the end of verse 14 in chapter 21. Vatelech. She departed. Vateta. She strayed. Bemidbar Be'er Shava. In the wilderness, in the desert of Beersheba. Now, as a result of the fact that she strayed, she lost her direction, it appears that they ran out of water. Avram probably gave them enough water to reach their destination. The water of the skin is consumed. Story goes on, as you know, that an angel appears to her and says, you're going to survive. And as a result, we have Ishmael. But the word vatelech vateta, that she strayed, the rabbis have a fascinating tradition that relates to that word. Vateta, that she strayed, they note, is not just physically, but rather spiritually as well. In the words of the rabbis, vateta, it teaches us that she returned to pagan practices. Hagar had some ups and downs in her career. Perhaps at the end of her life, she rebounded again. But at that point, the rabbis read into the word vateta. She strayed. She returned to some pagan practices. And the question we're going to address here is, how did the rabbis see in that one word that has to do with straying, lost, why do they see in it a person being lost, not just physically, but spiritually as well? So this is a question that many wonder. So I think it could be clarified by a story. After the war, 1945, 46, 47, we are a nation that's aching, and that's an understatement. But there are a few individuals that are true heroes of our people. Ones that made it their business and put time and effort and energy and money to help those that were in desperate need. Jewish communities throughout the world, and especially North America and in Canada, did a tremendous amount of chesed during those years when people in DP camps were in such desperate need. Now, the needs during that period of time were not just physical, they were spiritual. Communities were sending matzos, communities were sending shofros to the DP camps. And it appears that there was also a need for mohalim. There were children that were concealed during the war. And after the war, they needed a bris milah, circumcision. And it appears that mohalim were active during that period of time. So there's a story about a great rabbi, one of the greatest Torah scholars of that period, a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Mordechai Pagramansky. And Rabbi Pagramansky was in Kovna doing his part to try somehow to assist. He couldn't financially, he had nothing, but he assisted people with their emotional needs and with their spiritual needs. He made it his business after the war. And he got a message that there was a child in some suburb that was not far from Kovna that needed a bris milah. So he got in touch with some other rabbis, and eventually a mohel arrives in Kovna. The mohel and Rabbi Pagramansky get on a train to make their way to that small stop, that small community, that small suburb of Kovna. On the train, they're having a conversation that relates to Torah. It appears that at times when you have in-depth analysis of traditional text, you get too much involved. They got involved to such an extent that they missed their stop. At some point, around 10, 15 minutes later, the mohel panics because he realizes that we're no longer getting off at that little area that they were supposed to, at the little village. So he says to Rav Motel, "Oi, ta'inu baderech, we're lost. We're simply lost." And Rav Motel Pagramansky responded that you should know, by a Jew who believes in God, there is no such thing as ever being lost. If you land up in a specific location, there's a reason for it. And Ramoto said, Rabbi Pagramansky says, I could prove this to you from a Rashi. When you read in the Torah that Hagar was lost, Vateta, Rashi shares with us the rabbinic tradition, that it means that she was lost spiritually, that she returned to some pagan practices. Do you know how Rashi and the rabbis knew that being lost refers to paganism? Because a believer in God is never lost. If you believe in an Almighty and He is taking you where you're supposed to be, and you are going through what you're supposed to go through, you're not lost. If we describe her state as lost, it means that she lost something spiritual. She is returning to a pagan avodah zarah mindset. That's what Ramotel said. This mohel was very inspired by the words of Rav Motel, and they got off the train next station, and they crossed the tracks and get back waiting for a train that would arrive in several hours from now to get them back to their proper location. And at that point, a person walked over to them, and I think you could guess the end of the story, that there was a child in the second village that needed a bris milah. The mohel went, it was performed, and he said to Rav Motel, indeed, you're 100% correct. It appears that a Jew is never lost. Vateta. So, you know, there's a story that before we had on our phones Waze and Google Maps, so sometimes you would be driving and you would get a little bit lost, right? And I think for me, it was always the most terrifying location to drive in was always New York City. I hate driving in New York City. It got even worse over this past summer, if you do remember that I had an issue with the flood there. So I prayed to the Almighty that I shouldn't land up having to drive in that city. Nothing against New York, right? We all, everyone loves New York, at least according to t-shirts. So Imagine the following in New York City. You have a person that's trying to get out of Manhattan, but every single time he tries, he takes the wrong exits. And he lands up in the exact same location. And the worst part is that he has to pay a toll. Like in the olden days, you have to actually give $1. And so he makes his round once and he gives $1. And he makes his round 40 minutes later. He returns to the exact same location because he took the wrong exit and gives the fellow on the toll booth another $1. And this continues some 6 times. Nebuch, he can't get out of Manhattan. As he is approaching the 6th time, the fellow in the toll booth says to him, I've been here, in this toll booth for 25 years. I've never seen one person coming back over and over and over again and being lost, right? And making that mistake of getting off the exits so many times in a row. So the fellow responded, the fellow who Nebuch is making his rounds, he said, by the way, I don't think I'm the only one, because I have noticed that every time I come back, there's a pizza delivery truck that is also going through the toll every 40 minutes. So I'm not the only one. And the fellow in the toll booth responded, listen, there's a big difference between the two of you. You're just making your rounds and you have achieved nothing. The pizza guy delivery, he's coming every 40 minutes because it's a new delivery. It's a new delivery and he works fast. It's New York. Picks up the pizza, drops it off on the other side of the George Washington Bridge, comes back. So he's achieving something with every round. And I think that this little cute story is really a message of existence. That, sometimes we look at our days and they are the exact same thing over and over and over again. And there are 2 ways to live our life. One is to feel we're just lost and just continuously living, or believing that we are accomplishing everything in every single round, or we are accomplishing things. We're not lost. We're doing things that are meaningful. We connect to our Creator every single day with prayer, with chesed, with Torah study, with interacting in a positive way, being honest in the business, in the workplace, whatever it is, it's not just in vain. We're not lost. We're not vateta. That's the message. That's the message that the rabbis want us to take away from. You see the word lost, it's losing faith. A person with faith, things occur for a reason. That's the message we could take. Now, over the years, we've talked a little bit about the difficulty in the Akedah. And it's a brutal story to read if we don't have some guidance. The Almighty on the surface telling Avraham Avinu to offer his child. And we have to realize that this is not just something that's difficult to hear, but for Avraham Avinu, this is a pagan worship. In other words, throughout his career, he always preached that God does not want human sacrifices. That's not what he desires. God Almighty wants righteousness. He wants concern for the welfare of others. He wants justice. He wants humility. To go ahead and offer another human being was the antithesis of what Avraham Avinu preached and believed in. And here the Almighty, at least the way it was understood by Avraham, seemed to be a basic human sacrifice. Ha'aleo, right? Le'olah. Bring him up as a olah. Bring him up. So later on, we are told, you know what? There was a misunderstanding, or God wanted him to misunderstand. But we still have difficulty. For 3 days, he had to carry this burden, this thought. What is really going on here, right? So to understand it, I think it's important to go back to where Avraham Avinu interacts with a king called Avimelech. If you have a Chumash, it's in chapter 20. And we are told that Avraham Avinu moves towards the Negev area, not far from the Gaza Strip, and he settles between two cities, between Kadesh and Shur. The Torah feels that it's important for us to know that he settles between Kadesh and Shur. And he has an interaction with this king Avimelech. Avimelech takes his wife, and eventually Abraham tells him, listen, there's a flaw in your society, because en yirat Elokim, in verse 11 of chapter 20, you know what the problem of your community is, of your mindset, of your philosophy is? En yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh, you don't fear God. And commentators explain that this Avimelech had values. He was a rational person. In the past, we even connected the Philistine philosophy to the ancient Greeks, and they perhaps even originated from Greece. And these were philosophers. Avimelech was a person that had values and believed that rationally a human being is given the ability to figure out what is right and what is wrong. And that's good. However, what Avraham Avinu is telling him is that a rational being is good, and to figure out through natural law, perhaps, that God Almighty wants you to act in a specific way is good, but it's not enough. A society, a civilization, a world that is lacking the fear of God, at the end of the day, is going to be a corrupt society. If you don't have the fear of God and you don't understand that there's significance in every breath that a human being takes, so when there are going to be major decisions at the end of life for a person, the right decisions are not going to be made if you only function with rational thinking. You need yirat Elokim, you need the fear of God. That's what Avraham Avinu tells him. And the commentators note that when it comes to the ethical human being, the ethical human being has to understand that he stands in between things that visibly are righteousness. And in Talmudic, in the Torah, the word vision is shur, shin vav resh, ashureno. Shur is vision. So there are things that you could see that they are correct and they are rational and they are appropriate. But then there's on the other hand what we call kadosh, holy. Holy is basically, the Torah Jew knows that yes, there are many things that I can understand, and there are many mitzvot that I can understand. And I can understand why it's appropriate to treat others with respect and dignity and charity. All these things I could assure, I can visually understand with my human eyes. But for righteousness to survive, for ethics to be alive, for values to continue being for generations to come, we need an understanding that there's kadosh, that there's something holy, that there's a higher being, right, that infuses spirituality in areas that we cannot rationalize. I cannot explain to you in a rational way why a few weeks ago I was shaking a branch. But I know that it keeps me righteous and it keeps all of us righteous, because by doing so, I remember there's a higher being. I cannot explain to you rationally why keeping kashrut is beneficial. But I know that by doing it, I'm connected to a higher being, and it keeps me connected to something very significant. And therefore, in the beginning of this chapter of Avraham Avinu's interaction with Avimelech, it starts off with him being situated between the Kadesh and Shur. And he's telling that generation and all generations, know that you're going to live your life and you should use your rational thinking. It's important to use what we Jews were given, or humanity was given, really, that we could figure out right from wrong. But don't just rely on that. There's Kadesh, there are things that are holy. You could only preserve Judaism, and what anchors Judaism is the irrational. If you only work with what's rational, a future generation might see things differently. You have to remember that there's something spiritual, and that's what grounds our tradition. We, as Torah Jews, believe that we have a goal one day of inspiring the world with rational thinking, rational righteousness. The 7 Noahide laws are rational. And that will take place when we reach Jerusalem. when we have that structure in Jerusalem, it will not just be a structure for us, but for humanity. When we talk about a messianic era, it's not just good for us. It's not like the children book, the kids who get these coloring books, that in the messianic era, there'll be larger fruits. Okay, it might appear in rabbinic texts, but that's not the goal. The goal is that that humanity recognizes Hashem. And we will play a role, and we will have a hub where we can inspire humanity. That's a Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. And just as Avraham had a journey to reach that point, we have a journey. But we know very well that if we're going to go ahead and only think about our obligation or our relationship towards humanity, and think about only rational parts of our tradition as ones that are important, we're never going to get there. We're going to lose Judaism. If we don't stick to things that we can't comprehend, we're going to lose it all. I mean, we know historically that look at communities in Germany in the 1840s that wanted to have an influence on the culture and wanted Judaism to be a universal language, right, where we could guide humanity. But they got rid of those things that we don't comprehend. And they were lost. And there are no descendants really, or very, very few, of such followers of such a movement. What preserves Judaism is a commitment to the irrational. When you see people, right, and there are people throughout the Jewish world that are just sitting and studying Torah, and they perhaps don't even educate other Jews, they focus on their own limud Torah. On the surface, it's not rational. What contribution are you making to the world, right? What are you assisting the Jewish world by just sitting and studying the text? That may not be rational, but they are actually anchors to preserve the Jewish world. The irrational journey will lead us to that location where we can inspire humanity. And that's how I see the journey of Avraham Avinu, the painful journey where he misunderstood the Creator, and it was tailored in such a way. And for 3 days, he's suffering. And again, it's a great man who is able to address those emotions. But for 3 days in his mind, he is doing something that he simply cannot comprehend, something that destroys his whole essence. And he continues on his journey to that location. And his journey is our journey, that when we do things, right, and people deserve a tremendous amount of credit. When they have workplace issues and they say, I'm sorry, on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, I simply can't come in. When they have 2 days Yom Tov on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and they're and in the workplace, it's a nightmare. And imagine, for so many of people that when you have it 3 out of 4 weeks, when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, right? This is a challenge. It's not rational. How am I supposed to survive? How am I supposed to take care of the needs of my family with these laws? It doesn't appear rational. The commitment to the irrational is what is one day going to lead us and get us to our destination. That's the journey of Avraham Avinu. That's what the Torah wants us to walk away with, right? It is dangerous if we think that the essence of Judaism is doing things that don't make sense. That's not the case, right? Rambam, Saadia Gaon, they want us to analyze and actually take all the laws of Torah and put them in 2 columns. Things that are sichliot, there are things that we're supposed to figure, that we could figure out on our own. And then there are things that we do because we heard at Mount Sinai God telling us to do so. Indicating that, yes, a person, the human being and the Torah Jew, is supposed to be processing, does this make sense to a rational mind or not? There's importance to it, and it's a tool to communicate. We can inspire other Jews if we have an understanding that there are things that humanity does, and we could say that's a good thing, right? That there are values within Western civilization that we say that is based on Torah law. That's good. That's good. We're going to encourage a concern for the welfare of those who are in need. That is very, very good, right? We have to have the ability to identify such things. But never should the rational mind believe that there's no need for those things that we can't comprehend. We must keep it to reach our destination, a commitment to those areas that they don't make sense to us. We have to believe that there's reason, there's depth. And you know what? It's the greatest tool to connect HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that journey of Avraham Avinu and what he was willing to do basically has kept us alive, because every Rosh Hashanah, when we ask the Almighty for mercy, we read these verses. And throughout the prayers, we say, God Almighty, he did his part in that our great-great-grandfather did his part on that overwhelming journey. In the merit of his doing it, keep an eye out for us. So that's one of the important messages of this week's Parsha. So we talked a little bit about Sodom, and obviously the message of the Jew is to be the antithesis of Sodom. We are supposed to be ones concerned for the welfare of others. We are ones that's supposed to realize that we're supposed to use our tools and what we are given, because that's what we're here for. We also had the opportunity to learn a little bit about the story from Mordechai Pogromansky. We're never lost. The term teta, being lost, does not apply to a person of faith. And number 3, the journey of life and the commitment to those areas that perhaps we do not fully comprehend is our identity, our essence, and eventually that's going to get us to our destination. So I do thank you all.